Welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of DailyDead.com. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jonathan James, and I'm joined today by Bryan Christopher, Derek Anderson, Scott Drebit, and Tamika Jones. If you caught us for last week's episode, we discussed Fear Street Part 1, 1994, and Fear Street Part 2, 1978. In this episode, we will be concluding it with Fear Street Part 3, 1666. And before we jump into discussing the episode, a couple things I wanted to call out. First, as we did for the last one, we're going to dive into spoilers. We think the best way to discuss this movie is to talk about everything. And so hopefully you had a chance to check it out, along with the first two Fear Street movies. If not, check them out. They're great. If not, then come back and you can check this out later. And then the other thing that we're going to be doing is because Tamika was unable to join us for the first episode, we're going to start with you, Tamika, and want to catch up our listeners on some of the conversation that we had with our other co-hosts last episode. So I think, the two big things that I'm interested in knowing is, and we'll start with the first one, is, we've talked about Goosebumps in the past, but, growing up and being a 90s kid, what was your experience with Fear Street? Were you mostly a Goosebumps reader? Did you read a lot of Fear Street? Do you remember any of them? Let us know, Tamika.
Oh, yeah. I've said in the past that R.L. Stine is the GOAT. He is the absolute GOAT of children's horror. I actually started reading, so it was a progression. So I started reading Goosebumps books in middle school, because that tends to be the age for that, for those books. And I used to buy them from the book fair at the school. My middle school had a book fair. And I that's how I got them originally. And then I started checking them out from the library. And they're so much fun. They're a really good way of introducing kids into horror. It's kid appropriate horror. And then I aged out of Goosebumps, and by I'd say 8th grade, 9th grade, definitely high school, I moved on to the Fear Street books. And they're certainly not as mature as these Netflix movies, but I mean they're definitely geared towards high school age, I'd say 15, 16, young, to young adult. And I definitely have my favorites. I think out of the two sets, I think I prefer Fear Street books. I think, the content is more mature. And there's this book that the story sticks in my mind. But of course, the title doesn't. And so I've been asking for years on Twitter, giving people the synopsis that I can remember. Please, can anybody tell me what this book is called? Because it is driving me insane. And then I finally figured it out, thanks to actually a Daily Dead reader. It's The New Girl. Yes.
The New Girl. Oh, the one that started it all.
Yes. And the covers stick in my mind.
Yeah.
And what I remember happening in the books, but for some reason, certain titles just don't stick in my mind. But yeah, when I saw the cover and she told me, it's just I'm pretty sure it's The New Girl. I'm okay, let me look over it real quick. Just please, this has been 4 years in the making. And it's The New Girl. So I feel easy. My mind is easy with that now. But yeah, once I became an adult, then I moved on to Stephen King novels. So yeah, I've always been a fan of R.L. Stine's work.
Yeah, that's great. You had,
and I do
go
hope,
ahead, Bryan.
I do hope eventually they start making some adaptations of Stephen King books. Like maybe if this takes off, they'll do some more adult movies, and Stephen King will finally kind of get his cinematic due.
His time in.
I knew as
It's an
soon
untapped
as you
resource.
jumped in. As soon as you jumped in, I'm like, he's got something to say. It's not related to this,
and it's not going to help. It's not going to be helpful at all to the conversation.
But it was worth it. It was worth it.
It was.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because, you know, I definitely had a similar situation to you where, like, I loved those book fairs. And, you know, that was my way to pick up whether it was Scary Stories or Goosebumps or Fear Street. And then we would either trade books. I never kept a lot of them because we didn't own them all, but we'd trade them. And so it would be like, you know, a friend would buy, you know, one of them, we'd buy the other, and then swap when we were done reading. So I never kept any of them, but then when it wasn't the book fair, then it was the library. But no, I'm okay with the. I actually, thankfully, you sent me some Goosebumps books, and I believe a Fear Street book. And then I went to a local. What do you call those things now? It's like an antique.
Starts with an L. Library?
No, not a library. I'm like completely blanking on it. Yeah, it's like an antique. Like, well, it's like. They call it like these large garage sales or like a flea market, something like that. But
consignment store.
It's like this. It's like, what do you call it? The Renaissance fair, but for like garage sales. Yeah, but it's more than antiques, and that's why I don't remember what this one is called. It's like you can you don't need to pay for like a long standing like spot, like, which is like normal consignment. Like you can just show up on a week and like just bring your stuff and like have a garage sale. And there's also these antique shops. It becomes this like big, huge event. But anyway, when I was there, I found like the first 10 or 15 Goosebumps books. I found a bunch of Fear Street books. So we grabbed them all up.
Nice.
Well,
that's the way
funny.
to do it.
You mentioned book fairs, and I swear to God, I'm not about to make like a dumb joke. This will actually contribute to the conversation, I promise. I was just talking to my wife today about, I miss the idea of a book fair, partially because like I wasn't a big enough reader as a kid to really, like, I feel like I missed out on that because I didn't participate as much. And now I feel like that's an experience I wish I would have had. And so I wonder, like, if there would be a market for like an adult book fair at like where people work. And my wife mentioned that like if they were going to do that, they would probably need to like rebrand it as like a pop-up bookstore or something like that you know, pops up at places people's a business. But I feel like that's something you could make work. And if so, I don't even need the idea or the money for it. I want someone to do that and then come to my job because I think that would be fun.
That sounds amazing. I thought you were going to end with, you were going to offer 10% for $250,000 of. It was a hell of a pitch. I was 100% in.
You Shark Tanked it.
This is not even a money making venture for me. It's just like one of those things I missed from childhood that I want to be able to kind of try and.
No, the same thing happened to me as soon as Tamika said those words, book fair. I immediately went in my brain to being an 8-year-old and getting that flyer in class, taking it home. And that was like, what are you doing tonight? Well, I'm going through the catalog. What do you mean? What am I doing tonight? Like, come on.
Yeah.
This is important stuff.
Catalog.
Burnt offerings will have to wait.
Yeah. Like this is
you didn't know
shit.
what was coming up. So they had the new stuff on there. So
yes, it was amazing. So yeah, as soon as she said those words, I went off into this fantasy land about looking through that catalog and getting to pick out a couple books or whatever it was. And then when when the orders showed up in class, it was just like, it was like early Christmas or late Christmas, I guess, depending when it was. But yeah, no, magical stuff, magical.
But I was always that
for ours. Did all of you have we did have like in our library, like a pop-up. So like Scholastic would show up, or Scholastic reps. I don't think all of Scholastic showed up, or Mr. Scholastic didn't show up, or Mrs. Scholastic. But anyway, and they'd show up and they'd bring all the books. So like you could just buy them like right there. So, and there were, you'd walk through the aisles that they had set up and like they had hundreds of books. So
Our school did both. They had like the flyers that they'd do on a regular basis, and then like maybe once a quarter they would have just like the actual like mobile bookstore that they would just bring out, and you could buy, it was like the literary equivalent of like the Girl Scout cookie season.
Yeah, exactly.
They would just be there and you could get whatever you wanted.
Yeah, and I remember, I think it was like maybe parent teacher conferences or something. They would do that because I remember going to those at night at school, which is like a really cool but kind of weird feeling that you're there at night and you're like at a book fair. But I remember that was always really cool. And then then they would have like the catalog for the ones that didn't come out until later in the year, and you had to order them. And then it would take so long to get them that when you finally got them like 6 months later and you're a completely new person and you're like, oh, I totally forgot I actually ordered this. And it's kind of like a pleasant surprise because you just kind of assumed that it got lost in the mail or something. But yeah, that was always fun. It was like Santa sent you a gift that just got way detoured and you finally got it like in July or something.
Yeah. Oh.
It is kind of funny to like look back in hindsight and just see like blatant capitalism disguised as education from when we were kids, like the book fair, the Scholastic pamphlet, like the Book It program, like they were hustling when we were kids.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, I mean, personally myself, I wasn't getting, Joe and Jane Do Math, volume 7. I was getting the stuff that I loved, right? And I'm sure you guys were too.
Oh yeah.
To us, well, I mean, yeah, of course it's capitalism, but I mean, to an 8-year-old, this is just the stuff I love,
Yeah, and I don't even say, like, I'm not saying that as like a derogatory thing. It's just like interesting to look back on the stuff that like you wouldn't even consider because you were 8.
Oh.
Yeah.
The greatest is when they would send a company into the school because you're going to like sell like coupon books or whatever it was that they wanted you to sell. And they do like a huge presentation, get you all psyched up for like all the prizes that, probably like one kid has ever gotten because they actually sold enough.
You were never going to win.
And don't forget, even before school, you had 2 hours of toy commercials.
Oh, right. Yeah. There you go.
Before you went to school.
Just to get you ready.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that should be a Fear Street novel.
Oh God. 2 hours before school, the toy commercials before school.
What was all the cartoons you'd watch, whether it was Power Rangers or
oh my gosh.
I know, and I'm sure you watch Power Rangers.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, but so I'm specifically thinking of the commercials because I think a good Fear Street book would be someone caught in a 1982 commercial for Mattel or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that was basically a Community episode where Jeff gets caught in a G.I. Joe
the G.I. Joe one.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. That's true.
But when you mentioned that and like Fear Street, I was actually thinking of them doing like a YA version of They Live or something like that, where like a kid can like see through like the marketing of the of all the different like toy commercials and things like that. And then he gets into like a 12-minute fight with one of his school members.
Now this movie needs to be made.
Hear this. Come on, R.L. Stine.
I love it.
Yeah.
You don't even have to change the line about kicking ass and chewing bubble gum.
Except he says, but I've got plenty of bubble gum.
Yeah.
Because he's 8, so he just has a bunch of bubble gum.
Well, that kind of takes the steam out of it, but all right.
He probably does have
a
bubble gum, though. So I will move us on. And Tamika, the second thing that I wanted to make sure we talked about is, we know where the rest of the co-hosts stand in terms of the first 2 Fear Street movies. But why don't you tell us just very quickly what you think of the first 2?
Oh, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of this trilogy. I thought initially, before I'd even seen like a frame of the first part 1, 1994, I just knew that was going to be the film, like the part of the trilogy that I connected to the most, just because 80s baby, 90s kid. So I just thought, okay, like, from the poster, like a lot of that like glow in the dark, like it just reminded me of those glow in the dark stars that you put on your ceiling. It's like, oh, here we go. Okay, this is it. Like, I'm gonna love this, because like I already love the Fear Street books, so I'm in there. And then you're hitting my like 90s nostalgia feels. So I just thought, okay, I'm gonna really connect with part one the most. But in after, well, I'll leave part three out. But after watching part one and two, I really connected the most with part two, 1978. But 1994, I really enjoyed the characters. I like to see the chatting, Josh and chatting, like the chat room, the doo-doo. That hit me. I didn't expect that. But like it reminded me of AIM, the like doo-doo, doo-doo-doo. It's like, oh go. Oh, I love that. Like I love like the little details, like stuff, like little things like that. Because it actually feels like, okay, this is the early 90s, not like this is 2020 or whenever this was made, but they're trying to recreate 1994. So it's like the little things like that kind of helped me feel like in this world. And I also like the characters. So like, okay, I imagine there's going to be a lot of death. So I'm going to feel sad. And I did, it's quite sad. I'm actually really surprised by how, because I didn't know that these films were going to be kind of basically rated R. So I was shocked, but in like a good way. Like, oh, okay, we're like, this is not even like, I don't even think the Fear Street books were like this mature. Like, okay, I'm definitely on board with this. So I like the story, the explaining Shadyside and Sunnyvale, and like, alluding to this like witch Sarah Fear and setting up that whole mythology. I thought that was really interesting and something that definitely kept my interest and like my attention throughout the three movies. So good on Leigh, I hope I say her name right, Leigh Janiak. See, 94. Oh, the music. Oh gosh, the music. Even though not everything was released in 94, it's okay. Insaning in the membraning, in the creep, and only happy when it rains just felt, it felt like it felt good. It felt like a warm blanket. So I just think all of, part one came together pretty well for me. I think it was all very well executed, and it definitely kept my interest. The kills were excellent. The like nods to like Scream with that killer, like the I forget the boy's name, but the best, basically Ghostface. In the mall. Loved it. But 78 was really to use a 90s term, my jam. 1978 was like really my jam. And I think that's because, again, I liked the characters and they're continuing with the mythology. So we're getting more of an explanation about Sarah Fear and the curse on Shadyside and the battle between Shadyside and Sunnyvale. And again, I mean, the Friday the 13th references were excellent, especially part two. The kills were great. This is like a slasher, this is like an ode to slashers, this part. So they got the kills right. The kids felt like kids. And yeah, 78. Yeah, I feel like 78 was way more brutal than 1994.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Way more brutal. Like, even though they don't show the killing of the kids, but
they're still killing a lot of kids in that. Yeah.
Still killing a lot of kids.
Well, I would argue an excessive amount of kids die in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of them do get on that bus, but like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, even Jason Voorhees showed some restraint there.
Exactly. Even that too. Jason never killed a kid, I don't think. No. I think he ever did that. So yeah, Tommy, right? Tommy Slater.
Oh, yep.
Is the killer in that one? Yeah. Tommy.
Yeah. And then he was eventually gets the big head.
Thing? Wait, I'm sorry. Say that again. David?
Oh, he eventually gets like the part 2 Jason like big head.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, basically.
Even that. It's like, oh, I see what you're doing here, movie.
and even
I can't help it.
Even moves kind of like Jason in the early movies were just very like methodical. He's not afraid to hide, but he will also run at you too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like, I was thoroughly scared. I got to say, I didn't know, if it would scare me or if it would just be kind of like, like a fun, like, like not that I didn't have fun, I did, but I thought, okay, like this will just be fun to watch, like entertaining. But I was like thoroughly scared, scared, while watching certain scenes. I definitely felt the tension and like, oh God, this is not going to end well. Like, oh, these kids are, like,
well, it's definitely paced, right? It's definitely paced like a slasher, especially as it, starts out. It's, paced a little bit slower, but once the killing starts, it goes, extreme. And very, very gross. But I wanted to ask you specifically, Tamika, someone your age who is a horror fan,
mm-hmm.
do you identify as much with the 94 because that's your age group, or do you identify more with 78 because that's, an ode to slashers? Is there an allegiance? Is your interest in, is there a difference between your interest in both of them? Am I making any sense whatsoever?
Yes.
I'm just curious. Yeah, I'm just curious as someone your age, because they're clearly marketing each one, I think, to a specific group of horror fans, but there's so much overlap, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering how that sits with you.
That's such a good question. I mean, I certainly, I'm not gonna lie, like the music, although obviously not obviously, but like the music I recognize, but it didn't really like take me back to like any specific moments in my life. It's like, oh, okay, The Runaways. Okay, I know that song. Okay, but 1994, it's just like, I feel like when I mentioned the book fair and you said it just took you back to like, that time in your life, that music absolutely did that for me. And so I felt like that definitely, that's why I thought, that like I'd maybe be more invested in that story because like it's kind of more my generation. But I think the reason why I connected with 78 more, it's because I think that the story, we're getting more of the story is like more fleshed out. And so we're getting more like, we're going back in time. So now we're getting explanation about the goods and, like, are they really good? Do they know more than they lead on? Like, it, like, is the curse even really a curse? Like, is that story sort of a lie? Because we get the explanation in 94, like, oh, they lie, the sheriff lies, and like, oh, like, they were just drug dealers who just like were high and just killed everybody, So like by the time we get to part 2, you're starting to get like more pieces to the puzzle. It's like, oh my God, now I'm like super invested. So now I'm more invested in the story, because that I find it, the story itself to be interesting. And then on top of that, like icing, it's like the slashers and like the Friday the 13th references and like the, like the kills and like just all of it. So just kind of like all came together to be like a really delicious brownie.
And Tamika, that's an interesting point that you mentioned, that the 78 was more fleshed out. I also think there's an element of that's probably the most self-contained of all 3 of the movies, in terms of like the first one. Yeah, it's all in 98, and you definitely get a whole movie there, but it's clearly setting up as an act 1 of the rest of the trilogy. And then in the last one that we're going to talk about in a little bit, there's basically 2 movies in one in that. So in this middle one, obviously you get kind of the bookends of the stuff going on in 94, but most of this movie is spent in the 1978 story. So I feel like it's the one that kind of, has the most of a beginning, middle, and end, because that's just the way this thing is structured. So I think there's something to the idea that like they could make that story a little bit more fleshed out because they spent the most time there.
It's the Empire Strikes Back of the series. It really is. It's the story itself doesn't so much advance, but as Bryan says, it tells much more of a self-contained story, much like the Empire Strikes Back, right? What happens in the Empire Strikes Back? Like what cataclysmic events? I'm not talking other than the ending, but do you know what I'm saying? Story-wise, is it moving forward? Is the story moving forward, or is it kind of a lateral? And I get the same kind of feeling out of Fear Street 1978, and that's why I like super dig it.
And you definitely still get that same downer ending like Empire. That's that scene where both sisters are like in slow motion, both just kind of getting hacked to bits or stabbed. Like that is a harrowing scene.
Yes.
And the slow motion doesn't play as like glorified or romanticized. It's real sad. And I thought that was just really well shot, while also still being like really gory too.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you have to like sit with it. I think that's interesting too, because I think there's like a tonal shift, which I didn't have an issue with, but I could understand why maybe, some people would, because it definitely comes off as like an ode, like a love, letter to, like horror movies and like slashers. And like, so the kills are real brutal, but it's still kind of done with like, the tone is still kind of like, I don't want to say light, but it's, I don't know. There's more, you feel more of like, I don't really know what the word I'm thinking. It's like,
well, I do think there is an element of like subversion in terms of like you get used to these, and I think that's across the board. It's definitely going to come up with the third one, but with this the slasher trope setup, like they kind of run you through the various tropes until they don't, and for me that last death is usually the way we're used to slashers, is that the kind of there's the buildup, and then the gore gag is kind of the punchline. But here there's the buildup, and here the gore gag at the end with the sisters is more of a tragedy than it is a punchline.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of, you think what you're going to get right until Leigh Janiak and company kind of flip it on its head.
Yes. See, oh, that was so beautifully said. Thank you, Bryan.
Hey, you got me there.
Yes.
And I do want to, talk about something, and that'll kind of lead us into more discussion on the third film. Something you mentioned was, the fact that, like, we learn more in the second film than we knew in the first. And I think that the way, and as I was watching these movies, certainly from the first to the second to the third, and I think I even mentioned the podcast, like I like these films, but I'm waiting to see if they stick the landing on the third, because I think that's really going to inform what I think about the overall trilogy. And I think that, for me, it completely sticks its landing, and the third movie makes the other two movies, it punches it up. Now I know more about what I'm seeing in those films. I think it also makes it highly rewatchable. So anyway,
Yes.
so you know what I think about Fear Street 1666. We'll hear from my co-host, but I will take a quick break just to say, this is your last spoiler warning. Turn around if you haven't seen Fear Street Part 3. We're going to jump into everything Fear Street Part 3 in just a second. And just as like I said, as a quick synopsis, even if, some people like spoilers, so they just jump, just listen right away, and that's fine. And without having seen the movie. So for Fear Street Part 3, 1666, we know that Dina has been transported in one way or another to the original settlement before it was broken up, in that we see in 1994 and in 1978. And so we see the original settlement. She is now in the body of Sarah Fear, and she is living the events that we've heard about. And so are the events exactly as we've been told? Are they different? The movie kind of breaks that down, and then also takes us back to 1994 for part 2, where the film wraps. And so anyway, I told you a little bit about what I thought about the film, but I'm going to turn it over to my co-hosts to, like I said, the conversational kind of, just come up organically. So I don't necessarily wait for me to call on you. If you have a topic you want to bring up, feel free, and I'll jump in as it makes sense. I'll start by just, though, throwing it at Bryan. Let me know what you thought about the movie, and then I'll have everybody else jump in after, as it makes sense.
So I was all proud of myself in 1978 that I saw the twist coming, that the sister swip. Wow, I can talk. The sister switch. I almost said it again. But the fact that we were led to believe that one of the sisters is the one that's going to grow up to be Gillian Jacobs, but it turns out to be the redhead Sadie Sink winds up being Gillian Jacobs. Very proud of myself that I figured that out. So then, as kind of like my comeuppance, is that I did not see where this was going in terms of when 1666 started. I'm like, okay, I've seen this story before. Like, I've seen The Crucible, I've seen The Witch. I don't want to see this played out again. And so when we find out that everything we've been led to believe about Sarah Fear is wrong, and that the town's curse really, and I'm just coming out swinging with spoilers, is because of Solomon Good and the Good family. Didn't see it coming at all. Absolutely loved it as a plot twist, because it's something where I didn't see it coming, but as soon as you see that's where it's going, looking back at everything that happened up until that point, it all makes perfect sense and it all fits. And it's just, it's Jonathan, you had mentioned that, the way they stuck the landing here, made the first two movies better. And I literally went back after seeing this one in my letterboxd. I had the first two at 3.5. I bumped them all up to 4 stars because they did such a good job at making this a complete story where everything is like, all three of these movies are talking to one another, and it's doing it well, and it's doing it effectively, and it's just taking your expectations and just kicking them in the crotch. I loved everything that they did in terms of sticking the landing with this. I love that I was expecting the whole thing to be 1666, and maybe only about 2/3 of the movie was, and then it kind of slammed back into 1994 part 2. I thought maybe they were going to give it like a few minutes at the end to tie up loose ends. So no, I really thought this was well done, effective, and it made the whole trilogy better from the way they ended it.
Personally, I really enjoyed 1666. It really does come to a sensible conclusion within its own world. If I had any kind of issue with it at all, I would say the transition from 1666 back to 1994 just gave me such whiplash, and actually made the 1994 finale seem maybe a little more immature than what came before. So I guess not only aesthetically, but tonally, I guess, that kind of threw me. But having said that, it comes to a great resolution and really well done, and pulled off, I thought, with a lot of consistent style and energy, and a lot of empathy. It's a very empathetic series, I think, as well, which is important, I think, for this kind of work.
Oh yeah. I mean, I didn't expect for, as far as like the characters go, I didn't know really what to expect from, this story. And I thought it was really great to see, like two like LGBTQ like characters. That was really exciting, and I was very excited for like younger people who watch these movies. It's like, oh, that is. I wish that R.L. Stine had. I don't know if he would have even been able to even like do that without there being some sort of like uproar or something. But that would have been really nice. To see like in the stories, the Fear Street and Goosebumps stories that like we grew up reading. I love how that was handled. I try really hard to stay away from reactions, when stuff first comes out, and I ran across somebody on YouTube who said, like something again, agendas, and like, it's 1994. Nobody would have been, that open back then. Like, how I was just thinking, like, how old are you? Like, you honestly think that people weren't out in 1994? Like, no, it would have been, not at all, a good time, in 1994 for them. But like, no, I mean, people, it's just so frustrating to see that, like, especially because, I think it was written really well. And I think that it was, like handled very well by the director, the actors, the actresses. So yeah, I agree with that. There's just so much empathy, not just for their, story, but all of them. Because I think Josh, he's not like he's normally they would paint the nerd in a certain way that just like rubs me the wrong way, because it's like, yeah, okay, again, you've been made fun of for sure. I mean, Lord knows, like, you're bullied for being different and like liking certain things. But like, I don't know. I just really liked how they didn't treat him like this, like, stereotypical, like socially awkward, nobody likes him, everybody's mean to him, you know, character. And I also loved his Iron Maiden shirt in part 1. I was like, oh, I have that shirt. Like, yeah, Josh. And to be like the like black character on the, like the again, token. But again, I think that was maybe like a nod, maybe to like a 90s teen, horror or something. But it was nice to see that. Like he's like, like wearing an Iron Maiden shirt. And he like okay, he's listening to I think it was a White Zombie song. It's like, okay, yeah. But yeah, I love that it's not just about killing, it's about, sharing people's stories, and shining a light on certain things. And that I think that, well, certainly needs more of that, more empathy in the world. And I loved the aesthetics of 1666 for sure. But I gotta admit that the accents, I I appreciate the try. I really, everyone is committing to that accent. I'm not sure like what, like they were going for specifically, but
Tamika, I'm right there with you on that one. Like it's like, because I'm thinking about this compared to like The Witch, where Robert Eggers like clearly like did hours upon hours of research to get the dialect right. And here they're like, do something vaguely Irish.
yeah.
And like we'll call it a day. But it's like this isn't The Witch. It's not that type of movie. So it's like I do like that they picked something. Like I think they went into it knowing like, oh yeah, this ain't accurate, but it's going to give like a certain flavor, and they commit to it, which I think fits well with the tone of this series.
And I thought about some of the alternatives, and I'm like, in other hands, they may have not done the same casting, right? They may have actually given you different actors for those characters, showed us Sarah Fier and had it tie back, but not have it actually be those characters from the other movies. And so given
that's why I had some confusion there, because my impression was that she didn't get transported back, but she was seeing what Sarah Fier was seeing. That's what I thought, but your explanation makes more sense.
I guess, and that's a definitely a point to discuss and is open for interpretation, but because she experienced it, and that's why even in the beginning, I didn't have an exact phrasing for this. She certainly like is kind of destined for that to happen, but it seems like she's kind of physically experiencing this. It's not like she's just watching a movie, right? It seems like she's experiencing everything, feeling everything that Sarah Fier is. And I think that was really important. I think in multiple ways. I think from a character perspective, for Dina to experience this and then immediately be able to take that reaction and that understanding back to 1994. And then I think from an audience perspective as well, to be able to more easily relate to her relationship to some of those other characters. I think it makes, and especially with Solomon Good. I mean, like I said, it makes the most sense watching it to say, oh, we're just going to use the other characters that we cast. But I could imagine someone else saying, hey, we want to have different actors in it, and we'll just like call them the same names. But and to me, that would have been there would have been a lot more disconnect and confusion.
Yeah, I think my brain was just saying, you know what, that's one plot twist too many for me to take, the time travel. so my brain just like a good goalie just kind of swatted the puck to the side, and said, nope, you're not coming in.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't even know if it was like de facto time travel, but like I said, it did seem like she experienced everything Sarah did, whether it was like in the moment, whether she was transported there. It was, like I said, to me, it was more than watching. There was like I said, it took a physical and mental toll on her in a similar way to what it did to Sarah.
Yeah, when Sarah, and then kind of by de facto Dina gets her hand cut off, she feels that, it's not just Sarah feeling that, it's Dina feeling that as well. So for me, it was almost like a Ebenezer Scrooge, like Ghost of Christmas Past, but like you're going to feel all this stuff too, and you're going to experience it. It's not just a visual rerun. Like you can't change anything about what's going to happen, but you are in Sarah's driver's seat. You just can't really turn the wheel.
No, I'm sorry. No DeLorean.
No DeLorean, sir. Sorry. It does raise a good question, though, or at least an interesting one. Do you think, and I guess this is for the group, so we see multiple times like what Sarah actually looked like. It kind of flashes to her real face. In terms, we don't really see that with the other characters, but did you read that as, was Dina seeing her friends and various acquaintances in these people? Like, is that actually what they looked like? Or was she just, the only way like her brain could wrap her head around it was by kind of putting the faces of the people she knew in 1994 kind of in those roles?
Oh no, that's a great question.
Well, I think a little of both, because the 1994 ones make sense because she knows them, but then there's also like Tommy Slater, who's only in 78, and some of the other characters from the camp that are in there. So I feel like it was more of just I feel like some of it was that, and then the other part was just like, hey, we have these actors, like it'd be fun for the audience to see them again, and playing different characters, especially like the guy who did play Tommy Slater was like really creepy as Mad Thomas. And and then it was cool to see like Ashley Zuckerman as Solomon. He's almost unrecognizable from his role as Nick. So it's a really interesting like thing, because it's kind of like at this point we all know these characters, like we've had fun with them. It's, some of them have died horribly. It's nice to see them come back. But yeah, I'd be curious though to hear like what Leah would say about that, because like it makes sense to a certain point, but then also like how would she, how does she, maybe just the whole like Sarah fear line of, everything that she's come in contact with over the years just like makes sense to her in that moment or something too.
I know less now than I did a minute.
This sounds like it's like we're going back to Army of the Dead and time travel. So, but before we continue, I do want to make sure, Derek, I didn't forget about you, and we still do need to hear about what you thought about the film. So we're circling back now. So now it's all you, Derek.
Oh, no pressure. No, it was good. It was good.
oh man.
Now I gotta get some context, because it's not good because you only thought it was okay, which may be the case. It is because, Corpse Club listeners, that sometimes when we only talk about a single film, see now I'm talking about, when we talk about a single film, we know Derek is super passionate. He has a lot to say. And so the thing we were teasing Derek about is we said, hey, don't say everything you want to say about the movie for like 5 minutes straight, because then this episode will be only 20 minutes long. Now, clearly we've passed our minimum threshold for an episode. We're good. So Derek, you could talk as much as you want.
Filibuster.
Which does make me wonder, like, was he just like really taking that advice to heart, or is he just being a dick about it?
A little of both.
Yeah. I figured a little of both.
A little column A, a little column B.
Yeah, a little sass, but
well played.
No, I actually really enjoyed it. It was fun to watch this with the family. My sister, brother-in-law, and my dad kind of watched each of these movies. So it's kind of like, it felt like watching event television or a mini series, kind of like back in the day when they actually did those things on cable TV and a little bit more often. So it really felt nice to do that. And I would say definitely was really cool to see them go back in time to 1666, and pretty amazing that they got so many great performances, like multiple performances out of these actors. And I was looking on IMDb, and actually they had the same cinematographer, Caleb Hayman, for all three of these too. So it's kudos to him for kind of capturing three very different aesthetics visually. And it definitely was interesting. I know it felt like a much longer movie. The third one did, just because you had them going into the two different time periods. So it felt almost like a 2.5 hour movie. And I guess it almost was, but yeah, well, not quite that long, but it was a lot of fun. And I also was thinking a lot about The Crucible, and I was very thrown off because I thought that Solomon was going to be like a John Proctor character, because when he's initially kind of coming to Sarah Fier's defense, and you can tell that they have this really strong friendship, even though everyone's trying to push them together as a couple, but he's just kind of, it seemed like, they were just really good friends. And I thought that he was going to be the one that was going to be hanged at some point. And the fact that he actually ended up being the cause of everything was a total 180 that I didn't really expect, even though they've kind of been hinting at some stuff with Nick in the previous two films. I did not think that it was going to go that far. So I thought it was a really cool 180 that Sarah's actually kind of the hero of the story rather than the villain. And that kind of some good commentary on how history is not always what it seems, and that it really relies on the perceptions of different people, and how sometimes people in power make you perceive history a certain way when it's actually not that way. And so I think there's a lot of like social commentary going on in the third one. And, it was a lot of fun to spend some time back at the mall too. And we even got an Offspring song in there. So it was cool.
So you and Tamika, I'm sorry, Tamika. I was just going to say, in relation to you and Derek, the same question. Did you have any kind of special nostalgia for, say, the 94 over the 78, for instance?
I think so. Partly, I mean, I was definitely like, I suppose I was more of a late 90s kid. Like I was definitely around, but I just don't, it's a little bit earlier, but I do really love that era, especially with music and shows. And I mean, even then you're watching reruns from late 80s, early 90s in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I definitely feel more of a connection there as opposed to 78. But I think I just really, and we haven't seen like nostalgia. The nostalgia factor is just starting to dip into the 90s more. I feel like we've, for a while it was the 80s, and now we're switching over to the 90s. So it kind of feels like this is ushering in a new era, and it definitely does feel a little more of a nostalgic connection. So a little more personal, I suppose. And it's just fun to actually see and hear the songs and see the mall and everything. And it was an interesting time for the mall too, because the 80s is like the heyday of the mall, but then the 90s, it was still around, but I feel like it was starting to change a little bit. But I would say I definitely probably have a little more of a soft spot for 94. And I think I overall like the first film in this trilogy, 94, like back when you didn't really know what was going on and the mystery was so, I feel like the less you knew, like it almost made it more exciting as far as you don't know what's happening. Like I feel like it's a little more unpredictable, and I do definitely appreciate knowing stuff and like going back and rewatching it in the future. But I feel like 94 was so fresh that that it really just worked for me on so many levels watching that one first.
Now, Scott, I also grew up in the 90s, and you decidedly didn't ask me that question.
I did too.
And I feel like that was deliberate.
Exactly. I did too.
Derek and Tamika are the youngest members of our family.
Okay.
So I wanted to hear their perspectives.
I'm not even gonna say anything.
Okay.
Because it may be different than someone, a decade older.
Okay, Scott. So did you? Okay, so first of all, you think I'm a decade older than Tamika, so go to hell. Secondly, I will ask you then,
Close
did you
enough.
appreciate 1978 more, or did you appreciate 1666 more?
I knew. Yes, I knew that. I knew it.
Oh. 1978.
I will say one of the interesting things, and then the question I have, for my co-host in terms of like, which one of the three movies did you like the best? And, and maybe which was your favorite? And that might be a little bit different. I always do that. I mean, it's kind of like what we have for like Daily Deads. We have our favorites of the year because like I may like something that I don't think is the best made, but I'll watch it more and more. And this will pertain to this trilogy as well. Whereas I think something maybe a lot, better made, or I think is a better movie, but it's just not my favorite of the bunch. And I think that's the case here. I think 1666, I think, is the best made of the three movies. And I think I like the time switches. I love what they do with the characters. And I love that this movie, like I had mentioned, makes the other movies more important. But I think I have more fun, and I think the one I would rewatch more often would be 1994. And I think that goes to what Derek was mentioning is, while 78 feels like it's retreading some familiar ground, 94, I mean, and obviously 94 does too with Scream, but I think the way it ends and that kind of like the supernatural showdown in the school where they do where they blow them up, and when they're at the grocery store, the hospital. I don't know that it feels like, even though it's things we've seen, it was remixed maybe a little better. And so I do find myself enjoying that one maybe the most out of the three.
I agree. I think 1994 is my favorite, but I also think it's almost partially not the fault of the other two movies. It's just by circumstance. The other 1994 is the one that I'm seeing with new eyes and kind of like just kind of entering this world for the first time and being able to be kind of blown away and surprised by it in a way that like you just inherently can't do with movies that are kind of doing the subsequent story as sequels. So it's it's just the fact that it's hard to describe, but it's just the fact that they have to retread certain ground in the next two movies because they're kind of building on the same story. But just kind of that sense of mystery and kind of like wonder about what it is we're dealing with here in 1994, I think is just one that makes it just a little bit better than the other two for me.
Yeah, see, I would need to rewatch all three again because I've seen 94 twice and the rest once each, but I would need to watch them all again. But I think I would probably lean towards 1978 for the very reason that Bryan enjoyed it, which is that it's self-contained. It's the most self-contained of the three. So I think I would find myself naturally gravitating towards that. Plus, I just think it's a pretty good slasher, and I really like the characters. So I think I would probably be, even though I need to rewatch them, it probably would be 1978 for me.
This is tough. I agree with Jonathan that 1666 is the better like made film. But it's really the especially the 1666 parts. It's really hard to rewatch that because I did rewatch all of them in preparation for this podcast, and the 1666, like it hit me hard again. and it was very hard to watch just from like the obvious, like, like persecuting, Sarah and and her, I don't want to boil her down to that, but like her lover or partner that it's just like, oof. And then the basically just pinning everything that bad that happened to the town on her, like, because she's the easy scapegoat because like she's the gay one. It's like, I can't. Can we go back to, so when we do go back to 1994, it was like, yes, let's do that. Squirt guns, the glow in the dark, lava lamps, yeah, the mall. Let's get into it. And then, did anybody mention the killer's showdown that happens? That the killer brawl. Oh,
that was great. I love that.
That was so good. That was so good and intense, man. I love that. So yeah, I gotta say, rewatchability for sure.
Speaking of which, does anybody hope that we get some kind of a spinoff with that milkman character? Like, I want to find out more about him.
I want a kid.
I think it's definitely, I mean, they left enough like little threads there, and we have some decades. I mean, we have the 50s and the 20s. So I think they definitely left some breadcrumbs in case they want to revisit. And as popular as this seems to be, I wouldn't be surprised if they go back.
Yeah. Leigh Janiak even recently in an interview was saying how she does want to do more in this universe. She kind of pitched it as she pitched it as like a Marvel Cinematic Universe so they could just keep expanding it. And she said something along the lines of she wants to do a slasher set in the 50s because we don't really see many stories like that. And I think that would be the Milkman murderer too, so if they keep with the current killers that they have. So I think that would be really cool. I almost have to expect that they're going to do something. I mean, I don't know what the exact viewership numbers have been, but certainly like a lot of people online have been head over heels for these movies. So I would expect that they'll want to do something at some point if Netflix wants to put up the dough for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think they were in like at least consistently like in the top 3, like when they come out.
Yeah, I mean, it's the numbers are tough. I mean, they do release numbers from time to time. I mean, they actually just, today, the day we're recording, released numbers for like their top 10 movies, which get somewhere around like 75 million viewers to almost 100. And then, it's for Netflix, it's all a little bit different because like we know when a ticket's sold for a movie at the theater, when a Blu-ray is purchased, but Netflix doesn't need to release all of their info. And they, it's because this world of streaming is still so new. Like a watch, I think for them is that someone's watched at least 2 minutes into the movie. So it doesn't mean they've watched the whole thing. Does that even matter? I mean, at the end of the day, it really, whatever metric is their success metric to allow them to greenlight it. We don't know what the exact magic is behind the scenes, but hopefully these 3 movies hit that threshold.
Yeah, because I mean, I was joking, but the more I think about it, I kind of really do want them to actually do this. But I tweeted that because the end credits scene, or like someone takes that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I said if they ever do a part 4, like not to set it in like 2003, because like, oh God, look, 2003. But the more I think about it, like, yeah, part 4, 2000 Fear Street, part 4, 2003.
Well, yeah,
2003. So what was big culturally for 2003 in horror?
I mean, okay.
Torture porn, I think. Was that kind of
No, that was a couple years off.
Texas Chainsaw remake.
I mean, there were so many remakes of like classic films, like so many. I mean, like The Hills Have Eyes and like The Fog and like.
I would say if you make it a couple years later, then yeah. Or you can just ignore that and make it any year because apparently, the summer camp slashers were huge in 78. Right. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely playing very, very loose with the years, which is, I mean, it's something it's criticisms that I've heard. I mean, they're fair, but I think that, I think it's kind of understanding to what
it doesn't matter
exactly what the movie's going for. I mean, it's definitely more, what we're seeing is more fantasy. And I know that, it's, 1994 they're showing isn't necessarily the 1994 that I lived through.
Right.
But that isn't, to me, it doesn't take away from my enjoyment of the movie.
That's just a setting for the story. That's all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's things I've heard where they're like, there's not juice boxes in 78 and, things like that. So, I mean, they are valid, right? They are valid criticisms. So I'm like, these are things that, if other people were making the movie, they may be very picky about. In this case, we know this creative team isn't. And
like my movie would have a juice box consultant to make sure that we were authentic to the period.
I mentioned Robert Eggers before. I feel like this whole production is kind of like the anti-Robert Eggers. Like they know they're being anachronistic, and like they either don't care or they're doing it on purpose.
Okay, say potato. Close enough. Here's your costume.
Oh, they did shoot these back to back to back, so I'd be curious to know like how many days they actually had. Maybe it was just like, hey, we gotta get this thing in the can. Let's and it's still a very quality product. But yeah, there's definitely like, I mean, there's always stuff. Yeah,
what's the British actor's name who played Sherlock Holmes on the TV series Elementary? Johnny Lee Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys have seen Mindhunters, the Rennie Harlan film with LL Cool J and Val Kilmer and him about the profilers who have to solve a murder and they're getting murdered. Anyway, he's supposed to be a Southerner in this movie, which is something you only discover about 4 scenes in when he decides to turn it on. And then it's just horrible for the rest of the movie. So if I can live through that, these guys are nothing.
Or it's like Sean Connery in any movie.
Hunt
for Red October, The Untouchables, Highlander 2.
Where he's playing a Spaniard. What is this haggis you speak of?
Yeah. You don't
draw banker.
Yeah. I mean,
draw banker, Shorty.
I mean, yeah. So we lived through all of that. We enjoyed them. So like I said, so this stuff, it's just interesting. Like I said, when you have social media to see the things that bug people in mass, because it's like
I'm sorry if you're bringing a clipboard and a checklist to a movie, you shouldn't be watching movies.
One thing I was curious about, and my sister and I are talking about this, is when you look back at 1978 after finding out that Nick Good is the kind of the latest in the good line, who's keeping this tradition going of conjuring up these, or basically making good people into killers, and then he chooses Tommy Slater's name. Now he knows that Tommy works at the camp, and when everything's going down, it definitely seems like he works so hard to protect the camp, get the campers out and everything like that. Like he definitely cares about the well-being of the camp. He seems to really enjoy working there. So why would he choose, another person who's at the camp? Because he knows it's going to, like, a lot of people, it's basically going to ruin like this one happy place in his life. And he's trying to get like everybody out there as fast as he can. So I'm like, why wouldn't he choose maybe a name that wasn't at the camp? Of course we get a great camp killer movie out of it. So that part I'm not complaining about, but I'm like, I was kind of like, I wonder, does he have a choice of who he chooses, or could he have chosen like anybody from Shadyside? Or did it have to be someone from the camp? Because that was kind of the thing when I go back and watch 1978 again, and I watch I think it's Ted Sutherland who does a really great job playing Nick, who's this. And now I look back at it and I'm like, well, he's totally in on it the whole movie. I'll be curious what that looks like, because it does seem a little like conflicting. But again, who knows? It's, a centuries old kind of thing that he's involved with. And maybe he just doesn't have a choice, or doesn't care, or just really hates Tommy. Who knows? But that
So
was
what
one
you're
thing.
saying is the good family is bad.
Oh,
Dun, dun, dun.
good
That
to be
is a-
bad, I suppose.
That is a really interesting point, though, and I brought that up with 94 because we do see him show up right away to shoot the guy at the beginning of 94. Like, he's trying, it does seem like he's trying, at least in 94, to decrease the number of fatalities. Like, when they start the deal, I mean, my assumption is anyway, when they start the deal in 1666, they assume it's just going to be one life, not realizing that, you know, they're going to kill as many as they can get. And so I think by the time we do get to, you know, 78, 94, and we have Officer Good, that he is, I mean, he's still sacrificing people. So I'm not saying what he's doing is any better, but it seems like he is conflicted to some degree, or at least he's trying to minimize casualties, that he is trying to be there or in the area, which would explain why he picked someone he was next to in 78.
Ah, that is true. Okay. Yeah, maybe there's like a deadline where they have to choose a name by like the end of the month, or you get
We don't.
There's interest and you have to do 2 names instead of 1 or something. Yeah. See, I'm doing that thing. I'm overthinking it.
I do,
Automatic renewal on your credit card.
I do want to give credit to BJ Colangelo, who mentioned this, and I thought it was really funny and accurate, is that the goods have the ability to create whatever they want. They're making a deal with the devil, they're sacrificing, and the most they can come up with is to be like the mayor and the sheriff. Like that's as far as their aspirations go. I mean, they don't want to take over the world. They just want to, you know, they just want to like kind of own their little bubble and live the most mundane life possible.
And that's so true to life too, because it's like every time you hear stories about people who have a ton of money, like they don't even really know what to do with it. I forget where I was listening to this, but I was either reading or it was a podcast or something, but they were talking to someone who did service work at like a really high-end country club where they would do like these $500 a plate dinners or something like that. And so they'd have like these really like high-end chefs making these really gourmet meals. And you'd have these people like tapping the server being like, hey, can we just get like some chicken fingers and like macaroni and cheese? Like they can't even be decadent well. So I think that's like, it's such an astute point from BJ Colangelo, because it's the way people, like the wrong people are rich always.
Yeah. They're like, I mean, it's like corrupt politicians too, where they, you know, they kind of, they obviously have this inflated sense of ego, and they want to control their like little bubble. It's about like having control over that small world. And that's what they were able to do, you know, for hundreds of years. But yeah, like I said,
big fish, small pond. I mean, it really is the most realistic outcome if you really think about making a deal with the devil. If your family is nothing but tradition and towing the family line, of course, you're going to want to control the state. You're not going to be able to control the world. Who the hell could control the world but a state or a town? Absolutely. I'd take that deal.
I know. I heard you talking about it. Did anybody else? As Scott was like, but you could take a small town. You could. Yes, it would be possible. I was like, oh, shit.
Scott would make a deal. Scott would make a deal with the devil for like a lifetime supply of cheesies. So it's not like.
I'd take that deal.
We got to watch you, Scott. Well, what we can never do is we can never be in a room with you or all together anymore.
Wow. Okay. It's a bummer.
Well, maybe you shouldn't have said you were going to take the deal to start sacrificing people. We know who's top of the list, Bryan. But then after Bryan, it's going to be Derek.
Oh, Bryan and Derek.
I saved you, Tamika.
I know. Thanks.
Probably for third.
I think Tamika saved herself by not constantly getting on Scott's bad side like I tend to do.
Tamika would never, ever be sacrificed.
Yeah. Thank you.
You would have her be the killer to go after me first.
The rest of you have way too much paperwork to fill out.
Oh my gosh. I never thought about that really. Like, oh man, that twist. How did I not see that coming? Solomon, you got me good.
You know, the reason why, I mean, and it's fine. Like I'm okay knowing it, but I mean, the good thing was kind of a giveaway. I'm like, there's no way.
Oh,
you give him that name and
yeah.
he's not good. So I had a feeling.
He's good. He's not good.
Like he's not. You don't give him a name like that.
Yeah, true.
No, and that's what we were saying in the last episode, Tamika, is that it uses a lot of the YA lingo and structure, but puts it in very violent, visceral gore.
Mm-hmm.
And just how kind of wild that is and what a mixture it is.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it just, and it doesn't let up in 1666. I mean, come on. Like 666 and like deal with the devil. Like, love it. I just love it. Mm-hmm. Like poor Cypress, the minister, that church scene. Oh man, that was that was brutal.
Yeah, there were definitely some Event Horizon vibes in that one.
That's what I was saying too. Exactly. I was like, I even said that. I'm like, it's like Event Horizon. Where we going, we don't need eyes to see. But then just imagine I
really thought you were about to say we don't need roads, and I was like, how did we get here?
I thought that was Sean Connery.
Oh, yeah, that was intense. I did not expect that to. And it's funny because I thought that he was going to be like the villain throughout that movie, and then here it was like he took out like a third of the town, and then he was also immediately killed. So then I'm kind of thinking, wait a minute, what's going to happen next? And then it kind of turns into the Crucible for a little bit, and then it just goes full on satanic panic horror there at the end.
Yeah,
a lot of subversion throughout. But before I forget, because I didn't forget, Derek, is that you have not told us yet what your favorite movies of the series. We took it in all kinds of different angles and directions.
Yeah.
And I wasn't gonna miss you. So what do you got for us?
Well, it's something I've definitely been thinking about ever since watching 1666. And it's a tough one because I really like all three of them. I don't think they ever drop the ball with any part of it. And that's really, I think, hard to do with any trilogy, especially one that goes around to 3 different time periods like this one. But I got to go back to part 1 with 1994, mainly because it was so refreshing and unexpected. And I did not expect them to go as far as they did with the gore and to be as bold with the storytelling and to really just create their own universe within this world that R.L. Stine has created, but then to also just go and do their own thing a lot too, and pay homage, but then also create something kind of new as well. And I think it's so hard to recapture the unexpectedness of that first one, because a story like this, the more you kind of, like by 1978, I kind of knew what to expect because we'd already seen we knew more about the story at that point, and then even more so in 1666. And I really like both of those movies, but the first one was just like nobody felt safe. I think I had the two the two biggest surprise deaths in the grocery store. I think that was like the peak of the unexpectedness and the character chemistry. I thought like you actually spent a lot of time with them as a group. So it really just felt like everything fired on all cylinders in that first one, and then really not knowing where it was going to go next and the excitement of having 2 more movies. and just everything about it. I just absolutely loved it. So I think that one for me is definitely my favorite of the three. And I think it's I kind of look at it as like the Scream trilogy. As you go on, certain characters feel a little more safe. I didn't feel the same in the mall showdown at the end of the third film. I didn't feel that same danger that we felt in the grocery store in 1994. I felt like characters were a little more safe. And I'm not saying that everyone needed to die either. I'm glad they didn't. But I really felt like 1994 was the most dangerous and the most thrilling and really the most unexpected of the three. And I'm probably a little biased too, because it's the 90s.
Well, Derek, it's funny you mentioned that you didn't have that sense of danger in 1994 Part 2. I actually was surprised that they all made it out for the most part, because of how effective 1994 was at showing us how people aren't safe. So I was actually very surprised to see that not people didn't buy it, because I thought someone was going to go, just based off of that kind of baseline that the first 1994 was setting.
Yeah. And you know, and that again is kind of more subversion too on their part, because I really like Gillian Jacobs' character. You almost expect her to die, because you're like, well, you kind of get used to like nobody can have like a happy ending. Like she's got to sacrifice herself at some point so that the next generation can live their lives. And I'm glad that they didn't do that, because it's like, oh, it's actually nice that, she went through all this trauma and she actually gets to enjoy her life. And she was kind of, in a way, kind of like living like Jamie Lee Curtis in the latest Halloween film, where, she had just held on to this for so many years, and now she finally gets to like move on. And then you had that great character too of the mall janitor, who got to really get like a progressively bigger role as the trilogy went on. So it was fun to see that too. And yeah, so you're right. It definitely does impact, like one definitely impacted the other as far as expectations go.
I did. We could talk about this movie, as our Corpse Club listeners can hear. We could talk about this movie for hours, which is great. This is a lot about this series and just, what a great job they did with it. And while we're not rushing to get to the finish line, what I did want to make sure we kind of dedicated some time to was talking about, we'll call it final thoughts, but we'll say thoughts on the trilogy. Like, having now experienced all three movies, like what are you left with? What's, how has this made you feel? Like, what do you think about this trilogy as a whole? So I will leave it to any of my co-hosts that want to start first.
I mean, I think I've pretty much already answered that question. Like the way they stuck the landing with Part 3 just made me appreciate the first two that much more. And I hope that this is the start of a trend of kind of giving this kind of care and attention to, what could be on paper a very kind of superficial kind of a movie. And it's, we don't always need movies that like make you explore the dark depths of your soul. We don't always need stuff that's 100% a laugh, but like movies like this, where they have fun with it, but they're also really smart. I hope that this continues. And I think we're in a trend of that right now. I talked a little bit last time about how we have, filmmakers like Christopher Landon, screenwriters like Michael Kennedy, who are putting together these very slick and smart slashers. I hope we just continue to see this, because I can't get enough of it.
Yeah, keep them coming. It's definitely exciting to see that they let, a rated R trilogy like this happen, and that, that Leigh Janiak got to direct all three of them. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, she should have the keys to this franchise for many movies to come, or however long that she wants to be involved with it. And it was so great to see. It felt like, I keep going back to Stranger Things, but it felt like that a more, I guess, kind of like what that show, I guess, would eventually be or will be in the new season, is that, it's like these kids on this adventure, but now they're kind of like they're teenagers, and it just captures that perfect vibe of Stine's Fear Street novels, where it's like a little more dangerous than Goosebumps. People are starting to die now instead of just transforming into alien creatures or like having a haunted mask on their head. Like things are, don't get me wrong, that's definitely terrifying. And I love those stories. But now it feels like they just tapped into the little more like adult oriented, like R-rated storytelling of Fear Street. And I really can't believe that like this exists and that they were able to pull this off, and that, it's a really cool storytelling thing where you can film 3 movies back to back to back. So I'm hoping that I'd love to see more stuff like this, because it's hard to invest time in like a 5-season series, but if you can do like mini series, I think that is a really digestible form of entertainment. And I definitely would love to see more of this. And I think it could, if they play their cards right, I think they could do a lot more Fear Street mini series, whether it's connected to this story or whether it's a totally new story with new characters. I know Are You Afraid of the Dark has kind of done that with the rebooted version that they've been doing on Nickelodeon. And I'd be really curious to see. We saw the book. Someone took the book at the end, so it seems like they want to do more with it. So let's see who has the book next.
I think what it does best is works as phenomenal gateway horror for new horror fans, young or old, who are just coming in and easing into the genre. And what they get with these are, it's kind of like a Whitman sampler. It's it gives you a little bit of a few subgenres in horror, and does them in such a way that doesn't necessarily draw attention to them, but shows that you can have a lot of good content within that subgenre. So my big thing is I hope a lot of new horror fans who watch the Fear Street go and check out some great slashers from that era, or folk horror, or the Scream era. I think it's a great celebration of these kinds of movies. And so I'm really glad it's around, and I hope we see plenty more of them.
Come on, part 4, 2003. Come on. R.L. Stine, if you hear this, come on. I'll pitch it. I'll work on it. I'll make it I'll make it interesting, I promise. But
so now you do want to see the 2003.
Now I really do want to see it.
You could make it like Bruce Almighty, but make it Satan Almighty instead.
And the tagline could be "That's hot."
Scott, did you just Google 2003 movies and Bruce Almighty was the first one that came up?
No, I don't even know if it came out that year. I think it did, but I'm not sure. I just guessed.
You did have Freddy versus Jason that year, so
see, that would have been better.
And House of 1,000 Corpses.
Hi, hello.
Well, someone's checking, obviously.
Well, yeah, I did cheat, but
Fear Street of 1,000 Corpses.
Fear Street of 1,000.
Oh my gosh, Scott! Bruce Almighty did come out in 2003.
Thank you.
Please come get your prize after the screening.
Oh, that's sad that he
I hope it's a rump roast. I love a good meat draw.
Yes.
Tamika knows what I'm talking about.
Do I?
Well, you agreed with me, so yeah, you do.
But I wasn't agreeing to that part.
Well,
I wasn't agreeing to that.
Oh, and the Underworld franchise kicked off in 2003. Final Destination 2, House of 1,000 Corpses. I already said that.
See?
And knowing like whenever like sometimes I remember, I think Stranger Things got some heat for someone had a framed poster of The Thing, and someone was like, well, no one ever would have had that at that time of The Thing because, it took years for that to really get the appreciation.
Okay, so for Tamika's 2003 movie, which one of that, what's going to be the theme for that year?
I mean, Bruce Almighty, right? I think we already landed on that.
I mean, that makes sense.
Fear Street Almighty.
Fear Street Almighty.
No.
What was there in horror?
Now, I do agree to that. Fear Street
So what was the big horror? What was the big horror for 2003?
Well, he literally just said that, Scott.
We had Wrong Turn.
I feel like
Wrong Turn onto Fear Street. There, we got it.
Oh
like
my
that.
gosh.
I like that. I like
And it
Wrong
works
Turn
on
Fear
so
Street.
Oh my
get
gosh,
some
it
road
does work on
puns.
so many levels. It does. Settled.
They travel from the city to have their high school prom in the Ozarks.
As one does.
As one does. And things go sideways.
Boom.
I like it.
Settled.
And what's the
Practically writes
soundtrack?
itself.
Outcast?
Oh, the soundtrack is going to be a lot of like emo, like Simple Plan, Good Charlotte. It's going to be a lot of like.
Oh,
I feel like you've got some Aaliyah in there
pop
too.
punk.
Yeah. Well, 2003, I think because this is the 20th anniversary of her passing. So I think.
Jeez. Well, I will say that at least at that point, her music would have been out. So at least wouldn't be like they're playing songs that haven't been released yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, we never listened to just music from the year. Like when you're listening to the radio, like you get a range. You don't get future music, but you get music from the past.
Yeah, you don't get future music.
Maybe not on your radio, John.
That's my favorite station, future music.
You don't get future music. Yeah, that would be like super weird.
Your top 10 music is my golden oldies, everybody. I'm so far ahead of the curve.
It's like you've got the DeLorean radio, but the car itself doesn't work.
And there has to be a Hummer. There has to be a Hummer in this movie.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
I mean, what is more early 2000s than those ugly gas guzzling Hummers?
Yes. And obviously you can play like 3 songs just on the radio, just do little snippets. It'll be like the beginning of 10 Things I Hate About You, where you throw in 2 big songs right away.
Okay, guys, I got 2 words for you. Maybe it's 1 word. I don't know. Fear Street, Tybo.
That's like 4 words, Scott.
Other than the Fear Street part. Tybo.
2 words, maybe 1, possibly 4.
I'm haggling for words right now.
I smell burnt
Do I hear
toast.
3?
Does anybody else smell burnt toast?
Do I hear 3?
That would be amazing.
Right?
And then you kind of tap into like that fitness horror from the 80s a little bit.
That's right.
Oh my gosh.
There you go.
And it's going to feel like working out too, which is always fun.
Scott, I've got 1 word for you. Great idea, sir.
But it has to be like those Tybo videos that you'd see like after midnight on the basic cable channel.
Yeah, we still have the Tybo DVDs.
Oh,
I thought you were going to say like Tybo just got to Canada.
We just got it in theaters last year. No,
you got the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Not the other new one, but the first new one.
Too many new ones.
that Jessica Biel is going to be a star.
Yes.
You know what? I hope someone else writes this 2003 Fear Street, because I think ours sucks.
Well,
No.
the funny thing too is that that will be the next era for the nostalgia kick. What movies will tap into. I mean, there actually was a movie we watched recently called Summer of '03, which immediately made me like be like, no, it's too soon for this. But it'll be interesting to see what 2000s nostalgia looks like when we get there. And I think we're
I think we're starting.
Yeah.
They're already like remaking things from like the 2000s, like Gossip Girl and Winx
that's
Club.
right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Remember when they remade Cabin Fever a couple of years ago and everybody was like, why are you doing that?
But it was also like a shot for shot remake too. Is very experimental that way. I've never seen it, but I know that was like, I think it was almost word for word the same thing.
Well, because Gus Van Sant had such success with it for Psycho that they figured they'd just try and duplicate that.
You beat me to it, Brian.
It's the filmmaker gave great reverence to Eli Roth and didn't change a single syllable from his sparkling dialogue. No, I don't know. I didn't see the remake. I have no idea. I think I saw 5 minutes of it, and it was pretty people talking. So
we have gotten so off topic, and I love it.
We have.
But I just want to make sure that, Tamika, if you have any final thoughts on the Fear Street trilogy that exists now, that we
or Cabin Fever,
or Cabin Fever, if you want to add your thoughts to that too,
or future music.
I feel good. I feel complete on my thoughts. I love this trilogy. I'm really glad it exists. I hope it continues, but if not, that's okay. You know, we can do other things. There's plenty of Fear Street books to pull from.
This is true.
Plenty. Like The New Girl. Let's do it.
Yes.
Okay, well, I did want to turn it over to you, Derek, for your final thoughts as well.
Well, on the entire trilogy, it was just really satisfying. It felt like event television, which, I kind of like how things are spaced. There's kind of streaming services are going back to releasing one episode a week because as fun as it can be to binge, like a new season of something, especially like when Stranger Things was at its peak popularity and you felt like you had to watch all 10 episodes in one night to avoid spoilers, that can be a little harder to do. And I feel like it's just nice to be able to really think about each installment and have a week to kind of digest it and think about it and look forward to the next thing. But it was just really fun to watch this with the family, and we all really enjoyed it. We were kind of shocked by how far it went in certain areas and how dangerous it felt and how fun it was. It never lost its sense of humor. Even in its darkest moments, it felt like it was still having a lot of fun. And just the character building and the world building was really good. The writer's room definitely, I think, spent a lot of time on this one and really made sure to have all those connections feel genuine and not too all over the place. So I just cannot believe that they found a way to make this trilogy. I mean, we've been hearing about this since like 2015, like this latest adaptation since they announced it. And 6 years later, we finally got it. And it's pretty, it feels nice to be able to kind of just sit back and enjoy it finally and not be disappointed, which is always good. I think it exceeded all of my expectations because I was like, oh, Fear Street, that'll be fun. And I'd still like to see an anthology series that does adapt each of the books like one by one and kind of do it Goosebumps style. And I know, that may be the case with another R.L. Stine series at HBO Max, where they're kind of looking at some of his other books from Point Horror. But I feel like it would be great to get that straight up adaptation. But I was very appreciative of the world that they built kind of from the ground up. But it's like they built a new house in like R.L. Stine's neighborhood, and it's something that you can appreciate either way. If you've read the books, if you didn't read the books, if you're just looking for a good story, like this is it. So I just applaud Leigh Janiak and her writing team and everybody involved for doing something that I think is really special and for being allowed to do it without hopefully too much red tape behind the scenes. It feels like they were kind of allowed to do whatever they wanted creatively. So hopefully we get more of that in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're kind of all on the same page with this, which is, which rarely happens. And I think, for people that haven't seen these movies yet, and you're still, listening to our spoiler conversation, which is fine, check them out. There really is something special about these movies. I think it's very easy to, for people to maybe reduce this to say, hey, it's really just playing on nostalgia, specifically in the 90s, and, kind of plays on these things and uses what we've seen in other movies. And I would say that that's not giving, any credit where credit is due. And this isn't, to me, this isn't just, they didn't just do an okay job or a good job. I mean, I think this is a really impressive achievement from everybody, from, like I said, people in front and behind the camera. I just, it's hard to make one movie, let alone 3 of them. And I think that especially too, when you consider, having queer characters as your leads, to have that storyline run through your trilogy, is something that should be celebrated as well. Of course, we want to get to a place where filmmaking, where the entire world is more inclusive, where you can do whatever you want, regardless of your, age, gender, race, sexual orientation. But that's not the world we live in right now. And so we need people to be pushing in different ways. And in some cases, it's going to be baby steps. In some cases, it's going to be bigger steps. But I think it's really cool that we have this trilogy now, which is going to inspire another generation of filmmakers, like so, which moves the needle forward in terms of the types of stories that we can tell and the types of people that can tell stories and can be, leading cast members. And then, of course, from the horror point of view, I won't retread too much what Scott said, but I love that this is, going to introduce a whole new generation of horror fans to slashers, and they're going to dig into older movies, and they're going to be following horror movies from now on. I think it's kind of cool that, people in the future are going to be referencing the Fear Street premieres and the buzz around these movies. Like, you'll hear people saying, oh, I wish I was in the 80s when this movie screened, so I could have seen it, for the first time on the big screen. And then, the other thing I wanted to, mention, which I talked about last time a little bit, was just, I always, enjoy reading about what could have been or what might have been, and how just small little changes result in what we get today. And I also think it's pretty cool that Netflix made such a big deal about this, because originally this was set up at Fox. If these movies, no matter how much we enjoyed them now, if they were released before 1 year apart, I don't think they would have been appreciated in the same way. So I do think the release strategy was genius, and to put so much money behind the marketing and to making a big thing about this and releasing them 1 week after the other was a brilliant play. So, all in all, like I said, we got something special here, and I'm glad we all got to experience it, especially too, because, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Things are still, terrible. Things are getting better in some ways, maybe in others, not so much. And, so it's fun to have something like this to rally behind. And it was, like I said, a really great experience. And I've enjoyed talking about these movies over the last 2 episodes with my co-hosts.
Yes.
Ditto.
And so with that, we're going to wrap this episode up. We want to thank our engineer, Bryan, for helping us out each and every episode. And as always, we want to thank our listeners, including those who have signed up for a Corpse Club membership. You can visit corpseclub.com. You can check out all of our episodes. You can learn how to become a member. We're giving Corpse Club pins and t-shirts. We're giving membership cards, and you can pick an episode topic depending on your membership level. And don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Every rating and review really helps. We appreciate it. You can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, all of your favorite podcast providers. And if you want to get in touch, you can reach out anytime. We're at contact@corpseclub.com. On Twitter, we're at Daily Dead News. We're at Corpse Club. And on Instagram and Facebook, we're under Corpse Club as well. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, stay scary.